My name is Tal Hazak-Lowy, and I'm the Executive Director of Friends of the Children Chicago. Friends of the Children is a professional mentoring organization intentionally serving the children facing the greatest risk factors and the least protective factors in their lives. We commit to staying with each child and by their side for 12 and a half years, no matter what. We start working with children when they're between the ages of 4 and 6 years old. So every year we like to hold panel discussions about topics that we're talking about, and we find really fascinating experts and we bring them together, and then we invite you all to be part of the conversation. This is our first one that we've done in person since the pandemic. They've been on Zoom, so thank you all for coming out and making the effort to be here today. So thank you to all of you. Before we get started, I want to express sincere gratitude to our sponsors for today's event. First, I'd like to thank Jerry Newton and David Weinberg. Thank you very much for being ongoing supporters of our work. The Staines Family Foundation, and Latham and Watkins, who also provided this beautiful space and delicious food. So thank you very, very much. I also want to acknowledge that Friends of the Children Chicago is funded in part through the exciting Stronger Together initiative in partnership with Cook County in the United States Office of Treasury. So thank you very much. And I think many people here are funded by that grant as well, so that's wonderful. Today we're going to be talking about why relationships matter. It sort of is obvious to people, but not always in the most obvious ways. Next slide, please. Great. And so I want to talk to you all about the brain really quickly before we switch to our wonderful panelists. Every human being is built in the same way, right? So we all process information, and our brain then asks, are we safe? If we're not safe, we stay in what we call at Friends of the Children, the downstairs brain. And only when we feel safe and secure can we access the upstairs thinking part of our brain. The upstairs thinking part of your brain is where reasoning, logic, learning, all of that happens in the upstairs part of your brain. If you go to the next slide. And children, human beings, need somebody who's calm to help them get from their downstairs brain into their upstairs brain. Now, I want to distinguish. There's a difference between a safe, calm, regulating relationship that we're talking about and a loving relationship. A parent can be very loving of their child, but dealing with so much stress that they can't be that safe, nurturing, calm person, so they can't help what I call regulating a child. So that's the end of what I'm going to say and what I know. I have the experts here who are much more interesting on this topic. So I'd like to introduce you, and I could not thank you both enough for being here. First to Dr. Christian Jones, an assistant professor at the School of Social Work at the University of Washington in Seattle. Christian's research examines how youth mentoring relationships can be utilized to prevent adverse outcomes and promote positive strengths for Black youth. His research is grounded in his passion for equity and inclusion, specifically as it relates to marginalized youth and their families. He has special interest in mentorship as a tool for gun violence prevention. Thank you very much for being here. Dr. Sam McQuillan is an associate professor at the Department of Psychology at the University of South Carolina. Sam directs the Youth Empowerment in Schools and Systems, the YES Lab, an applied research group focused on translating theories of child development into pragmatic prevention strategies. Sam is particularly interested in how relationships between young people and adult helpers promote youth development in the context of schools and other social systems, including the justice system. Thank you both very much for being part of this work today. So Sam, I think we'll start with you. I think that most people understand that relationships are foundational and super important, and they help people thrive. What makes a safe, stable, nurturing relationship so important?
Okay, great question. First of all, thank you all for coming. Excited to be here, Tall. Thank you for inviting us as well. I promised Tall that I wouldn't ramble. I think she's going to cut me off at like 3 minutes on these. So I think one of the things for us to think about when we grapple about this, it should be common sense to all of us. But if you think back like 10,000 years, there was only like a million Homo sapiens on the planet. We're a blip in the mammalian radar around the globe. 10,000 years later, we're the most populous mammal on the planet, outnumbering rats and goats and other things. And I'm not a biologist, but if you look at what the biologists would say, what caused that adaptation that we subdued the earth was in large part that we have an uncanny affinity for non-kin, non-reproductive relationships. In other words, we have friends, that we form these long-standing relationships with people. And that helped us adapt to our environments, overcome challenges, cross continents, all these things that it's programmed into us that we need these type of relationships. And if you look at some of the neuroscience, not a neuroscientist, but if you look at that, when kids are lonely, it's the same parts of their brain that Tal was talking about that's signals like hunger or thirst. It's your body telling you, whoa, something's not right. Like you're not safe right now. You don't have those relationships. Because it's so central to what we are, is we're relational creatures. If you look back to ancient wisdom and like the creation narrative, what's the first thing that wasn't good? It says it's not good to be alone. So we are inherently relational creatures, and that's one of those things when we don't have those, our body's going to tell us something's not right now. We know this, and then I'll be quiet. If you look at social isolation literature, the Surgeon General 2023. Just announced it's the third crisis in 20 years. If you look back, so COVID was a crisis, the child and adolescent mental health crisis, and then right before that was the HIV/AIDS crisis, all things we know about. This third one is the crisis of, and they calls it an epidemic of loneliness and social isolation. The reason it's an epidemic is we know basic science facts, our physical health suffers, our mental health suffers, and our ability to relate to others long-term suffers when we're isolated in childhood. They've even said that loneliness and social isolation is a morbidity factor that's akin to smoking like a pack of cigarettes a day or morbid obesity. So these are things that the CDC cares about even, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but right. Hopefully I answered the question.
No, good. So Christian, I want to ask you sort of the same question, but add a twist to it, and then either of you can respond. But I want to make the distinction that if you're a child or if you're a human being and the other relationships you have with people are people that are really stressed out as well. And so they may be loving relationships, but they're not safe, calm, and nurturing. What impact does that have on a child or a human being?
Yeah, well, first off, thank y'all for having me. I'm still taking it in, and I'm sitting up here right now. This is crazy. I would actually pose that question back to the crowd and just think about, well, would you be here right now if it wasn't for your most impactful mentors? And think about how different your life would be, professionally, personally, emotionally, spiritually. I know for sure I wouldn't be up here without those really impactful relationships outside of my house. And a lot of times they were telling me the same thing my dad was telling me, and because it was coming from him, I didn't want to hear it. But having those types of relationships, I think, like Sam was saying, that's what makes life worth living. Life is undefeated. It's so difficult out here in a lot of different ways. So having that person that help you, and especially different developmental stages, whether you're a kid having fun, a middle school student trying to navigate and figure out the world, thinking about identity for the first time in a really thoughtful manner. Whereas high school, you're thinking about, well, what does it look like to be independent, interdependent? So those safe, stable relationships are everything. They're what makes being a human, and what makes life possible to navigate.
Great. Sam, anything that you want to add about just if a child is living through a lot of stress and their parent or caregiver is living through a lot of stress as well, what impact does that have on the child?
Yeah, so, stress, there's the kind of old famous psychology curve is the Yerkes-Dodson curve, where it's like stress to some extent is adaptive, like it helps us get out, say, hey, you got to get food, it's getting cold, or these type of things. Stress after a certain point, though, becomes aversive, where we know that it's not only it's starting to hurt us, and our body will respond by releasing cortisol and those things, but it also becomes unproductive, where the things, the goal-directed behavior that we have that should be motivated by what we'll call stress, actually becomes harder to do those things, where we can't actually get stuff done that we want to. And it also takes a serious toll on our physical health. When a child is in an environment, and we're relational people, we all have the capacity for empathy, and we see things, we're taking cues as children to say, what should I feel right now? And if you're looking around and everyone is distressed because of the environment is distressed, your body's going to start saying, I should be distressed. There's good evidence for this. And like if you look at the literature on crisis negotiation or counseling and things, of how we mirror people's affect to let them know, like, I'm here with you, but maintaining calm. Kids pick up on that. And having, in the midst of chaos, having someone that can be with that child and say, you're safe right now, we're safe together, we can help set them back to that downstairs brain to relax it a little bit, so we can say, okay, what do we want to do right now? How are we going to get it done? What are our goals that we have?
Thank you. Kristen, did you want to add anything, or are you good?
Oh, no.
Okay, good. Mentoring is often thought of as limited to like hanging out with a kid to be just support for the kid. But the research shows that the positive impacts a mentor can have when they're involved with the child's family or school or teachers. I'm wondering if you can explain that. Who wants to take it first?
Yeah, I could take that first. So this was actually one of my little aims of my dissertation, and I was really interested in how mentors interacted with the youth's family and their social network. And what I found was when you had a good relationship with the family, it just made the mentoring relationship so much easier. People talked about getting buy-in when I was really cool with your uncle, your cousin. I might be a little hesitant of you at first, but then when I see my uncle showing you love, like, I'm more willing to let my guard down. And the mentors who were most successful with the young people worked with the family like a team, but not just the parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins that's not really your cousin, but you've known them your entire life. Even people's barbers and people who are really important in your social network that help you on a daily basis in different ways. So oftentimes, especially pre-90s, when things were a little bit more deficit focused, you had people either looking at the family as a deficit, you're the reason why you're in a mentoring program, and they kind of shun them away, or they're an afterthought. They're not, well, I'm here to work with the child, not with the family. And we just know that you can't do that and have the impact you want to have unless you include the family into the relationship. And in the school, I just argue, like, the school is probably the most important social setting for young people. I think it's 1B to your household. And if you go to a horrible school, like, you're gonna have a really tough life. So working hand in hand with the teacher is just absolutely essential.
I mean, I think the only thing that I would add is parents are the experts in their kids. And if we really care about that kid and want to, know what they're interested in or who they're like, we should be in relationship with their parent as well. But also, I think the other thing that we've seen in Friends of the Children, especially with what they call the 2-gen model and, parent support, is parents can benefit from a lot of support that organizations like this can offer. And it helps if the parent, you think about what the kid sees. The parent sees this person as a helper, just as the kid sees the person as a helper. What can really happen, especially from, I think, the deficit model, is where the parents are, wrongly perceived as a barrier to getting to the child, is that you're not going to have trust with the parent. You don't have trust with the parent, you're not going to get it from the kid either in those contexts. Or if you do get trust, it's perhaps at the expense of the relationship with the parent, which we know would be really, really bad as well.
Right, so at Friends of the Children, we start working with children when they're in kindergarten, and we have professional mentors. This is their full-time job. They all have at least a bachelor's degree. Someone just asked me, their starting salary is $53,000 plus benefits. So we want to take good care of them so they can take good care and work with a roster of only 8 children. And we build positive, trusting relationships with the parents and caregivers as well, and with the children's teachers as well, because we want the parents and caregivers to know that they can reach out to us. But to your point, in the schools, many of our children go to schools where the teachers are overstressed And the impact of being exposed to a lot of hardship and trauma is that a kid may act out and be a behavior issue in school. And if that teacher doesn't have that context to understand what the child is going through, they often just hate on the child and often hate on the family because they've known the family for a long time. So I think it's like creating that context to understand what's causing the behavior, to why it's important for schools as well. Sam, something that comes from your research, we know that relationships are healing in and of themselves, but you also talk how relationships can be a means to other outcomes like skill building. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, so I think probably the easiest way to explain this without going into kind of the academic debates around it is the famous British sorceress, Mary Poppins, who sings that, what's the song that she sings? We probably all know it. A spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. Yeah, so the idea is that there's a less preferred behavior or activity that's health promoting, the medicine. Like kids, that's yucky, you don't want to do it. But it's actually good for you to take it. So the spoonful of sugar, it sweetens it so that the health and growth giving medicine becomes not only less preferred but desired to get it. And the example that I give, I have a middle schooler, have 3 kids. My oldest is in middle school right now. And if I were to put him in front of YouTube and say, have at it, he's not going to be searching for social emotional learning skills. He's going to be searching like Fortnite or something, you know. But he's got a little guy that helps him at school, a mentor named Abe. And Walker, my son, thinks that Abe's the coolest thing ever, way cooler than me. But he'll let Abe sit down with him and do reading and social emotional learning and all these things that he would never do on his own. But he delights in it when he has this nurturing relationship with a person who he perceives as being cool, that he can get along with, he can do it. So I think when we think about relationships, one, we need them. They're essential to life. Like our health is not okay, but they're also one of the core ways that we adapt to our environment, that when we have goals that we get through, we do these things. And if you look at this, like the best coaches on the planet figured this out by trial and error. Like even our militaries that are super successful figured this out. This type of camaraderie and relationship helps us do really difficult tasks that are goal directed.
Right. Christian, do you have how do you think that relationships help people learn, build skills? Like what is it about that connection? How do relationships help people do that?
Yeah, I mean, the relationship is everything. It doesn't matter how great of an educator you are, how great of a clinician you are. If that person doesn't trust you, if that relationship isn't there, then, it's all for naught. It doesn't matter how great your clinical skills are. So the relationship is the core to everything, and everything just stems off of that. I'm having a flashback. I used to be a foster care counselor and a community support therapist before I decided to get my PhD. And went to the middle school to meet with one of the youth I worked with, and I saw he had this really tense interaction with a teacher. And I'm like, man, I've cussed you out before for not doing your homework. How come you don't react to me like that? And he's like, well, when you cuss me out, I know you care about me. Like you have my best interest at heart, whereas I don't feel like this person cares about me. So like that trust is like everything. Like if you don't have that, you don't have the foundation to build on it, to teach the skills that can help them be successful, whatever that looks like for them.
I'm going to go off script. Can you go back 2 slides for a sec? And I'm going to say something a little controversial. But a bunch of people are like, oh no, Tal, don't do it. But I think about cognitive behavioral therapy is a common practice, especially for violence prevention. Let's just get people to stop and think before they act. I would argue that someone needs a relationship, like to help them feel like they can't access that part of their brain, what we call the upstairs thinking part of their brain, to stop and think until they feel safe and secure. Like you can't just, is a relationship sort of in feeling safe and secure necessary before someone can effectively do cognitive behavioral therapy? Thoughts about that? Either one of you?
I think it's just like what Christian said. The literature would show that without a relationship, I guess the researchers would call like a working alliance, that you have shared goals, mutual respect, things like that. there's just not going to be outcomes. Like that's like one of the foundational skills. They call it a common factor, that all of our effective helping strategies depend on the relationship, despite the strategies being different. Cognitive behavioral therapy one, but there's others too, but they all depend on the relationship.
Right, and the calming effect that it gives. So you can answer that also, but I also want, like, at what stage in a person's life is it important to have a relationship? Does it kick in at like 14?
I would say as soon
Leading
as you
question. Yeah.
come out the womb, like you need a relationship in order to thrive in this planet. But developmentally, mentorship is always really powerful and important. It just looks different at different ages. When I think about my work with elementary school kids, a lot of it was just having fun. And like, how do we have fun teaching you history? How do I have fun teaching you like how to navigate your neighborhood or teaching you life lessons through movies? Whereas middle school was more like identity development. You're really starting to think about race, gender in a critical way. Like, how can I expose you to different things and just like bounce questions off of each other? And in high school, it's like, all right, you want to move out your mama house. Like, let's talk about like what that looks like for you. Tangible skills like cooking, cleaning your clothes, to like, what do you want to do with your life? Like starting to think about what do you think your purpose is? So mentorship is always incredibly valuable. It just looks a little different depending on the developmental age.
So at Friends of the Children, we intentionally identify the children facing the hardest lives. We identify children in partnership with schools to tell us, like, this is a family that really needs extra help. We identify families in partnership with community violence intervention organizations, partnership with DCFS, with the foster care system. So we really want to identify the kindergartners whose family is exposed to significant hardship. And what having a mentor in their life often means is home life can be really, really stressful all the time, and that sometimes the mentor is the person that just gives them space to be a kid, to just play. And I'd also argue, Gary and I were having a conversation earlier about literacy, and I won't go off on literacy, but there's interesting information about it later. But poor children, Black children in Chicago public schools are not being taught how to read. The percentages are absolutely abysmal. There's a number of reasons that we can talk about it, but part of it, and I would argue, and I would love to hear your all thoughts, is that learning how to read happens in your upstairs brain. The downstairs brain, if a child just saw something horrific at home, didn't sleep in a bed last night, wasn't fed last night, they need someone to help them tell them, I recognize your hardship, I'm here for you, so that they can access their upstairs thinking part of their brain. And we have a great example, and I'll share a video with you all about a child we had that was having a really rough day in school. He was a 5th grader who's reading at a 1st grade level. He went to school, he was acting out all day in school. He got in trouble all day in school from his teacher. Willie, his professional mentor, picked him up, brought him to our clubhouse, and he was angry at Willie, and they just loved on him for half an hour. And then he told them, you know, I'm scared we're gonna be evicted again. That's a heavy load for a 5th grader to carry in his heart all day. But it was only when Willie loved on him, and then they sat and worked on literacy development. Where am I wrong? Where am I right? What are your thoughts about sort of that presentation about the importance of a relationship to take care of a kid who's experiencing hardship?
Yeah, so Sam knows this about me, even though we just met. I love The Wire. I think it's one of the best TV shows of all time. I would argue season 4 is the best season of all time. And unfortunately, I think it just really illustrates how schools can really fail kids. So I think about, well, what would it look like if those kids were in FOTC? And not that it would fit everything, but just how it would help a lot if you had a safe space you could go to, even if it was just a few hours a day, a few days a week, and how much that would help you to have a safe space just to read in peace, to feel validated, to feel supported. And I feel like a lot of my work, especially with young men I had the privilege of working with, was you don't have to be tough around me. You don't have to be hard around me. You could just be yourself. You want to read comments, we can read comments. You want to watch Dragon Ball Z, we could watch Dragon Ball Z, we can do whatever. Like, you can like be a kid, and so much of my work with young people is just giving them a safe space, and that stable, loving relationship is just priceless. Like, I think that's something that I know I for sure took for granted growing up, just being incredibly privileged, but having multiple people in your network that want to see you win. And the more people you have in your network like that, like, you can't, it's harder to lose when you have so many people rooting for you to win. And I think that's a huge way to help overburden schools as well, providing extra support, which makes FOT's model so dope. That
FOTC is Friends of the Children.
I hate when people use acronyms, so I can't believe I did that. But yeah, just having that intensive mentoring model is really important when people have the most need.
Yeah, so I think I love the examples that you gave. And I think so I'm a school psychologist by training. So before I went into the academy, I was in the schools doing a lot of the kind of MTSS, IEP, working with kids that had disabilities or were suspected of having disabilities. And a lot of what our responsibility to do is to say, why is this child underachieving right now? So if we've got underperformance in reading or things like that, we had to do detective work. And there's a bunch of reasons, right? Might have, like, it could be, that they're not getting taught. And that's been the case before. So, if you don't get taught how to do things, you're not going to learn. So that would be one thing we would rule out. But I've only really had two, like, miracle cures where a child was totally fine. They would have been misdiagnosed as having a specific learning disability. The first was because of sleep. Like, if kids aren't getting sleep, it will present as a host of really bad things. This is well known. The other one, though, is if they feel safe and connected to school. One of my students, Anna Flitner, she was at South Carolina, is now back in Wyoming, but her dissertation, she looked at thousands of kids across the country. And basically the research question she had was, how does feeling safe at school affect kind of your ability to have relationships, but also to perform academically? And when kids go into their building and they don't feel safe, it's very hard for them to build relationships with their teachers, which are critical. Those relationships with teachers are critical. But when their schools feel more comfortable, more safe, those relationships form naturally, and then guess what? Learning occurs in those situations. And one of the things I love about Friends of the Children, when you have tremendous systemic issues that are making schools feel like unsafe, like some of the schools now, it's just shocking. They look more like correctional facility. They look unsafe, approaching them. But you can have a mentor that's connected to that kid, that the kid knows is a safe person, interacting with that school or supporting them with school in a way that can kind of teach them, like, we can be safe and do the same things when we're learning together, which I think is one of the cool things about the model.
One of the things, so our professional mentors always work, when they work with a child, the first thing they're doing is paying attention to a child's physical and emotional well-being, and they tend to that first. After that, they work on 5 focus areas, but one of them is to make sure that every child has a team of support beyond their parent or caregiver and beyond the professional mentor themselves, and always making sure that every child has one person at school that's so excited to see them in the morning, to say, "Good morning, I'm so happy you're here today," or "Willie, I missed you yesterday, where were you?" Because for many of our children, they don't have that in the schools. Like, people are stressed out if they're a behavior issue. So yeah, so thank you for saying that. And that's it. So we try to intentionally make sure that we make it a welcoming place. So you're both familiar with the Friends of the Children model. Most mentoring programs work with volunteer mentors. I'm wondering if you can just share, like, what makes Friends of the Children different? What makes a professional mentor and a long-term, in-depth, sort of 12-and-a-half-year commitment to support a child different?
Yeah, I can take that first. I've worked a lot with volunteer mentoring programs, and I'm a big fan of that model. I think it could do a lot of good. But when you're serving young people with the highest of need, they need more intensive services. So I've heard some pretty sad stories of people who were super close with their youth, had a great relationship with them, but they're only seeing them like 2 times out of a month. So there's only so much you can get done if you're only doing 2 hours out the month and y'all are hanging out, but you're not working with the family, you're not interacting with the schools, we're not talking about these things that are impacting your community, whether it be firearm violence or whether it be suicidal outcomes at an all-time high. So thinking about just how important it is to be as inclusive as possible, as intensive as possible for people who have the most need. To me, intuitively, professional mentoring just makes a lot of sense when we want to provide the best services to those who have the most hurdles, but have some of the most potential too. I think about all the potential that's we just don't invest in certain neighborhoods, and I think FOTC is a really dope, innovative way to do that. Or Friends of the Children, I'm sorry.
So I think, well, and Tal and I have talked about this because a lot of my research has been focused on brief mentoring relationships. And a lot of that research that I did was not, brevity for the sake of brevity. Is the reality that in most volunteer mentoring programs, even if the kind of mark of a successful relationship is over a year, by the last time I checked, I think in most volunteer mentoring programs, about 60% of the matches fall apart after a year. So a lot of my work was focused on, well, how do we get some good done if it's only going to last 6 months? But that was because these programs couldn't reliably engineer relationships that could last a long time. And granted, you can get some great things done in a couple months, but you have to be very focused. You have to be very focused on what you're trying to get done, whether it's literacy or social emotional development, things like that. The beauty of a long-term nurturing relationship is that the child, I think Christian said this great, mentoring looks different. It looks different in each semester, each month, and the kids' needs are going to change. You're going to have, like my son's in middle school, we got relationship drama starting to happen. We got friendship drama starting to happen. They didn't have any of that in 5th grade. So the beauty of these long-term relationships is you have this trusting person that can follow the kid and be sensitive to the needs as they go throughout school. The other reality, though, is that, and I've written about this, is I question the extent to which some of the short-term relationships, including the programs that I've developed, would qualify as a safe, stable, nurturing relationship that the CDC has identified as like one of these major protective factors. I don't know if it would actually qualify as that, the stability being kind of one of the core features. And I think that is really what Friends of the Children offers, is stability throughout the course of the child's life.
And I think I would add that children don't live siloed lives. Human beings don't live siloed lives. And so it's really important that we are involved and have a relationship with what's happening at home, that we have a connection to school and can pivot to whatever the child is going through. Because if a child is hungry or has marks, I mean, we're mandated reporters, of course, but isn't sleeping in a bed, then our family and community engagement specialists can make sure that we get furniture for that family, because that's going to tend to that child's well-being. And so it's identifying all of their needs. Before we go on, I want to make sure that we have time to take questions from the audience. So just raise your hand and ask a question if you have any questions. And if not, hold on, I'm going to pause to see. Yes. Thank you. So I'm going to try to paraphrase your question so everyone can hear. I'm actually going to ask you all to answer it first, and then I'll give the Friends of the Children perspective. So the question is, what age should we really be focusing on? And should it be 4th grade or just adolescence and higher? And at Friends of the Children, all of our professional mentors have at least a bachelor's degree. And are we missing out that the children may not be able to relate to our professional mentors because they don't understand life on the streets? And there's people that have been on the streets, that have seen the light, that may be able to relate and connect with the children better. Is that a good rephrase of what you said? Great. Okay, so first let me turn it over to you all, and then I'll give my answer.
I'll say, first of all, I think the good point that you brought up is that what we would probably call credible messengers, people that are familiar with kind of the culture, context, and situation of kids. There's good evidence that credible messengers can reach kids in ways that other people can't. And I think you're talking about someone that's familiar with the street, that knows what it's like, that's been around, that has some credibility with the kid, that they, are familiar with the context, what the kid's going through. There are challenges with that for, background checks, legal checks, and those things. In a lot of ways, they're tragic. And, without throwing the baby out with the bathwater, they're designed to protect kids. Are they perfect? By no means. There are some great programs, and I'm going to forget. I could figure it out afterwards. Let's connect. But there's a great program that has safe, effective ways of recruiting credible messengers to work with children. And a lot of that is around navigating the safety and legality of having kids work with individuals that have criminal backgrounds as well. But that's kind of what I would say with that. But I do think that the other thing I want to recognize, you said, stuff gets different and weird in adolescence. It's different than childhood. So that's an important caveat.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. So we should connect afterwards. The first place I went in my brain was just how important it is to have mentorship from someone who looks like you with a shared identity, and just how powerful that can be on a number of levels. But then the importance of having multiple mentors. So I did a research project a few years ago with Friends of the Children. And one thing that stood out to me from the young adults I was talking to who were in the program was how it wasn't just their mentor that they worked with. It kind of was like a collective mentoring effort. And they went to the Friends of the Children's office and then would hang out with other mentors and learn from them as well. So you don't have to just rely on just one person. And then you also made me think about the importance of having a mentoring network. So I worked with young people who they've been through gun violence, they've been in gangs. I can't relate to that. Unfortunately, I've been robbed before. Sadly, we can relate to that. But in terms of being in a gang, I don't know what that's like. So I can't talk about that, and I'm not going to try to. I think it's really important to stay in your lane and be authentic. Because if I tried to act like I had that type of experience, I'm a fraud, I'm fake, I'm capping, as the kids would say. They could just see right through that. So I think it's really important to be authentic. And how can I work with people in their network who do have that lived experience so we can just provide that person with the most support possible? Which is, I think you're also speaking to the community cultural wealth model. So how do we view these communities as communities that have a lot of knowledge, that have a lot of wisdom, that have a lot of wealth, and how do we work with them just to provide the most holistic support to the young person? Because we all need multiple people in our lives to help us be successful. So how can I work with the person who has that specific lived experience, and we work as a team to best support that young person?
Thank you both. So I have a few answers for you. So one, our vetting process to hire a professional mentor is very intense, and I'm very proud of it, right? Because we need to hire people that feel love and compassion and can connect with the families that we serve. So part of our interview process, the third round is a bunch of role plays and scenarios that we take someone through. And the fourth round is they meet with one of the caregivers in our program, because our caregivers can smell out inauthenticity better than anybody. And they're like, this person has airs about them and I would never work with that person, right? So they're our best screeners for our professional mentors. We strive to hire professional mentors that look like the children that we serve. 98% of the children and families that we serve are African American. I think it's like 83% of our professional mentors are African American. And you're right, all of our professional mentors have bachelor's degrees, but they're superheroes in their interpersonal skills. Many of them live and grew up in families that they understand or have a peripheral understanding to what the street life can be like, or what people living in poverty and hardship can live, what it looks like, and can relate and connect with the people. The beauty to me of our program is that we start working with children when they're between the ages of 4 and 6 years old. I would argue we are not, we actually get a lot of funding from violence prevention programs. I will argue that we are, I was like, show me your bucket and I'll tell you why we fit in that bucket. But we are a violence prevention program, but I hate that language, because that language implies that our children are destined to become involved in violence, but they're not. If we give a child proper support from a young age, they're going to stay on a positive trajectory. Now, I'll add something else. People tend to go into the family business, right? So if my mom or dad was a lawyer, the likelihood of me becoming a lawyer is very high. If my mom or dad is involved in a gang, the likelihood of me getting involved in a gang is very high because that's the world that I'm exposed to. And so what we're able to do is to expose children from a young age to a whole other world as well, while loving and appreciating and creating a really strong bond with their current family. Never, never, never do we disengage their family. And the parents and caregivers are our partners from the get-go, right? So no family is forced to be part of our program. We build our secret sauce. What we do at Friends of the Children is build authentic, trusting relationships. And so those parents and caregivers, they want help. They want better for their kids. They don't want to dismiss their other family members, but we're all working together to support the child. So what makes a difference for us is we start talking to children about their feelings and processing emotions from the time that they're in kindergarten. And that's why we're able to continue to make connections. And we're always focused, as I told you, as one of the 5 focus areas is helping children build a team of support so we can help them connect with other adults in their lives, whether it's a barber, an uncle, an auntie, someone at school, someone that has an interest. We have kids that are super into cooking right now, so we're trying to find chefs to connect them with so that we can help them build more of those positive relationships. So thank you for the question. Anybody else? Yeah, so at Friends of the Children, I think this is important that the children get the support of their professional mentor, but they sort of get the support of the organization. And our offices, we call them our clubhouse. So we have a big clubhouse in North Lawndale on Pulaski in the BBF building, for those of you that know. We also have a clubhouse in Woodlawn, and we like to think of it as the kids' living room. So the kids can come out, we hang out, play games, have serious conversations. We just created, thank you, Cook County Mental Health. We just created a partnership with a mental health agency called New Life, New Solutions to provide therapy at our clubhouse because one of the barriers to getting mental health support to go to therapy is access, affordability, stigma. I'm forgetting one other thing. But by having it in the clubhouse where our families are used to coming to our clubhouse, they trust us. The families, and we're just now beginning to provide them mental health. It's launching next week, which we're super excited about. The one other thing that I was going to say, that most programs are built to help those that want to help themselves. So if you're willing to do the hard work, we, organization, are going to commit to you. But the reality is that poverty and being exposed to a lot of trauma is really, really hard. And that's going to have a lot of negative impacts. Depression, for our parents and caregivers in our programs, depression, substance abuse, anxiety, just trying to meet basic needs. And so sometimes their executive functioning, showing up to a meeting on time, making the right decision, I'd argue that all happens in the upstairs brain. But our parents and caregivers are super stressed out themselves and have never received support and don't trust most people and systems. And in fact, will try to push away people and systems because they're used to people giving up on them, basically telling them, you're worthless. You're a failure, right? And so oftentimes they'll push us away, push people and other organizations away so that they're not rejected themselves. And what we do at Friends of the Children is what we call it relentless engagement. We keep showing up and loving on our parents and caregivers, even if they make the wrong choice. That seems like the wrong choice to a regulated mind that slept in a bed, that had enough food, that doesn't have stress at home. And we keep loving on them so we can keep that connection, so we can connect them to resources when they're able and willing to be connected to resources, but we keep showing up for their children and for them, even if they don't want to take advantage of those resources. So anything that I've said that sort of triggered you all to want to say something else about relationships?
Yeah, no, I can just add something to that really quickly. The study I did a few years ago with young adults who talked about their experiences in the Friends of the Children program, talked about the importance of having that physical space, whether it's just a space to do your homework, a space that has laptops, computers for you to use, a space where you can hang out with other people at different schools and expand your social capital. So now I'm getting invited to different parties at different parts of the city. So I'm like getting out of my neighborhood. So that community hub is really important in some really tangible ways to give people a space, resources to be successful outside of school, outside of the home. Just the more community hubs, the more safe spaces young people can have, the better.
Okay. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Andrew Height-Susan from After School for Children and Teens Now, Act Now. And I was wondering about sort of the professional development or training of mentors. Like, what sort of things are important for them to be trained on? What are important things for them to be looking at? Because we all know that like good, healthy relationships can happen with anyone, but like, is there a level of training that needs to happen for quality mentors?
So I'll let you guys answer, then I'll answer. Yeah.
So, this is a big focus of my research is training mentors, and a lot of my work is on training volunteer mentors. But I do think, and I've been working with Friends of the Children since around 2018, and a lot of the work that I've done has been helping doing some quality improvement on their training and infrastructure. So in Friends of the Children, there's they all go through like new friends training, which is basically like a week of training. But then they also have ongoing professional development trainings. They have a apparatus called Friends Learning Academy, which is an asynchronous online learning system that takes the friends through like friend fundamentals, which is like basic relationship development, but then school engagement. How do I engage with the school? What are IEPs? What do I do at a meeting? What are the different kind of structures in the school? Family engagement, how to engage with families and things like that. But then we also have built into that a bunch of trainings on other things like counseling skills and motivational interviewing. There's one on attunement, which is kind of getting to what you said about creating those safe, stable relationships. But it's the idea of this is that what a friend needs in terms of their training is going to depend on the age and stage and context of their kid. So a lot of that stuff is designed to be on demand. So you don't really need information on substance abuse stuff until you've got a kid that's engaged or has family members that you might need to learn a little bit more about it. But you guys probably have something else.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add to that is through my research, I've found that mentoring programs typically do a really good job with the training when you start the relationship, but there's not a lot of support throughout the relationship, especially once you make it through those first 6 months, you kind of on your own. And a lot of mentors have talked about the importance of, one, talking with other mentors and how important it is to bounce ideas off of each other, but then also having that ongoing support throughout the relationship when the relationship lasts past a year. And mentors I interviewed specifically identified high school. They needed a lot of support with the things that their young people were going through, whether it's like, well, how do I convince them to hang out with me anymore? Whether it's things happening in a high school that they can't relate to and then need support from the mentoring program or other mentors that they can bounce ideas off of. So to me, that was one of the biggest takeaways from research that I've done is providing ongoing support, ongoing professional development is absolutely critical, where most mentoring programs do a really good job with that onboarding training. But what about like when things happen throughout the relationship, how do we provide the best support possible to providers?
So Friends of the Children National provides training for our mentors, as Sam shared. We also have a few final copies. Sorry, unfortunately, I don't have any you can take home, but our Friends Foundation's guidebook. And this is the training book that we use with our professional mentors that I invite you to look at. The first thing that we're doing, and we need to train and we use the terms professional mentors and friends interchangeably, if that was confusing. But we do a lot of talk about the brain and the impact of trauma on the brain, and to understand if someone's acting out, to not say what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. And we also do a lot of book groups and book reading, and I highly recommend, write this down, Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey have a wonderful, wonderful book called What Happened to You. I recommend listening to it because it's a conversation between Oprah and Bruce Perry, and everyone wants to listen to Oprah. Right, but like to understand that if someone's acting out, something's going on. And so therefore, there's also training in here. How do you help regulate a dysregulated child or adult, right? If someone's really angry, yelling at them back is not going to calm them down, right? You need to stop. You need to validate them. You need to let them know that you hear what they're saying to you. And then calm so you can get them into their upstairs brain so you can start reasoning and having a conversation. And then we talk about the focus areas of, so for early elementary, we work on the team of support, as I said, literacy development, goal setting, building skills, building independent skills, and self-awareness, which just means self-love and self-confidence and understanding who you are, what you're feeling, and what your basic needs are, including sleep, food, or whatnot. And we do annual surveys with all of our children that are third grade or older, and with our caregivers. And something that just came up, the oldest kids in our program, we just launched in Chicago 6.5 years ago, is that we're starting to see self-harm amongst our kids. Among 30% of our kids are doing self-harm. And so all of our professional mentors have a program manager that's overseeing what they're doing so that, one, they can coach them. Two, they can pay attention that if the professional mentor is getting stressed out from the vicarious trauma, we need to take care of that staff person so they can continue working with that child. And two, we can identify when do we have additional training needs that we need for our staff. So right now we're putting together training for self-harm. Yeah, Mr. Chris Patterson. Right. Thank you. So our oldest kids, and it just goes along like the developmental stage of a child is really important. And the skill set you need for any of you that ever, if you are a parent or an auntie or an uncle or a grandparent, hanging out with a 4-year-old is really different than hanging out with a 12-year-old, right? Like the eye rolling, the dissing you, you can't take it personally. Like that's just, they're just preteens or teens, and we need to adjust it. And so we benefit from being part of a national network that has many chapters have experience working with adolescents. And so we learn from them. And I would argue that the level of poverty, trauma, and violence in Chicago is off the charts compared to any other place in the country. So we always often lean into other experts in the community, many of which are here, to make sure that we learn from them and to create proper training, because all of our work is always guided by the needs of our children and families, right? So whatever they need, we need to pivot to make sure that we are, you know, one of my obsessions, but it has to be on the back burner. It's a back burner obsession, but is that issue of sleep. Our families on the whole are not getting enough sleep. They're up until 3 o'clock in the morning. They don't have enough furniture. They're staying on the floor of someone's house, sort of name whatever thing is happening. And so that's going to make it really hard for a kid to behave. I mean, think about the day when you've been lack of sleep. I'll tell you about me. I get really cranky and irritable with people. I can't pay attention to anything. I just want to eat cookies, right? Like, so that's the same thing that happens with our families, but there's other issues that we need to deal with first. I'm just going to bless you. God bless you. God bless you. Good. I would argue that there's many people here because how many people here work for community service organizations? Raise your hand. Thank you all for being here. How many of you work for organizations that somehow defines itself as violence prevention? Right? So I would argue, and I alluded to this before, but I want to say it again, no one's destined to become involved in violence. Right? Like nobody wants to do that. And we have to say, how many things went wrong for a person? How many ways did society fail a young child that they got to the point that their best option was to be engaged in violence? And so I think that for many people, they don't have that safe, stable, nurturing relationship. Again, I want to be clear. It doesn't mean that they don't have loving relationships. You can have, and I'll tell you about a mom in our program who loves her 5 children so much. She is the best mom in the world when she's sober. She struggles with alcoholism. There's a lot of instability and trauma in that family's life. And so those children, their father was shot and killed 3 years ago. The family's been evicted. They're effectively homeless and move around right now and switch schools. The one constant in their life are the mentors. 3 of the 5 children are in our program. When the father was shot, the first phone call that mom made was to friends of the children. The professional mentor that was there is here. And we went to go pick up those children, and we held them as they got the terrible news that their father was killed. Mom is a loving mom, but she's really, really stressed out. Now those kids, now we're mandated reporters. We've called DCFS about this family. We tell mom that we called DCFS to tell her you're not making safe choices for your children. No action has happened, but we stay there for those kids. How those kids don't get angry at the world they see that they're living through so much hardship and no one's there to help them. Fortunately for this family, we're there for them, but they still have anger, and we understand why they have anger. These little kids are living through more hardship than what most of us can imagine. And then if you add to that their trauma, if no one's taking care of them and no one's teaching them how to read, not only is maybe no one giving them a sense of belonging, but if you're in 6th grade and you can't read, you're reading at a 1st grade level, school's not going to be a place of belonging. So then you can either go to school where you know that you don't belong because you can't read and you can't engage, or you can join the best youth group in town that's going to make you feel wonderful and a sense of belonging and connected, important for who you are today. And that's why we start working with children when they're in kindergarten to give them a sense of purpose, to take care, to validate their feelings and tell them, I see you, I see your needs, and I'm going to take action to make sure that we take care of your needs. And so that's what we do at Friends of the Children. I want to thank you all. So first of all, I want to thank our wonderful panelists for being here today. Thank you very, very much. Christian and Sam are phenomenal teachers of mine and to Friends of the Children as a whole. I want to thank you all for coming out on a Friday morning, and we will stay here to answer any questions you have. And Friends of the Children staff, raise your hand for a moment. You can look around the room and reach out to any of us to ask any questions that you have. Thank you very much, everyone.